Today we are going to start one more part of the iOS interview question series. This is part 4. If you haven't seen my earlier parts like part 1, part 2 and part 3 of iOS interview questions, I will leave a link to those parts in my description. Please do watch those videos before watching this video. And if you're going for iOS interview, I can assure you that if you watch those 3 videos and this video, you'll be much more confident. Now we can just jump right into this part 4 of iOS interview question. So the first question we are going to take is, what is viewDidLayoutSubview? So viewDidLayoutSubview is one of the method in view controller lifecycle. So this is called whenever you lay out a subview in your view controller. So as the name suggests, right, viewDidLayoutSubview. Whenever you create a subview and it is being laid out in your view controller, then this method is called. In another word, we can say that whenever our view is being updated or rotated or changed, or whenever its bound is being changed, then viewDidLayoutSubviews will be called. So every time your view bound is being changed, then viewDidLayoutSubviews will be called. So if you want to perform any operation, like you want your button to look much wider than how it looked in vertical, you want to make it much wider in when your phone is in horizontal mode, then you can do all those operations in viewDidLayoutSubviews. So whatever operation you want to perform, whatever UI changes you want to perform when user rotate their screen, then you can do all those things in this viewDidLayoutSubview function. Okay. The next question we will take is loadView. So what is loadView? So this is again a function of view controller lifecycle. So this is only called when you create your view using storyboard, not using storyboard, using programming. So most of us, whenever we create a UI for our iPhone application, you use storyboard, right? Even I use storyboard. It's much simpler and it's easier. But when you're writing very complex application which has a lot of screen, like 50 screens or something, uh, maybe like not even 50, like 20 or 30 screens, then it is better to create your UI using programming. Okay, so in that situation, you will be calling loadView to create and initiates your UI view. Okay, so loadView, what it does, it creates and initiates the UI view. So loadView is only called when you create your UI using programming, and it is very different from viewDidLoad, because viewDidLoad is called when view has finished loading, whereas loadView is called when view just starts loading the screen. Okay, so this is loadView. This would be asked in some interviews, but it is very good to know information as well. Okay, NSArray versus array. This is a very important question, and you will be asked this question a lot in the interviews. So NSArray, and what is the difference in NSArray and array is? Array is a struct. So if you know, struct is value type, whereas any NSArray is immutable Objective-C class, and therefore it's a reference type. So if you know the difference between value type and reference type, you know the difference between array and NSArray as well. So if you do not know the difference between value type and reference type, I would again suggest you to go to my first part of this series, where I have explained the difference between struct and and class. In short, value type means the values will not be changed if you are changing the value of, let's say, so we can take this example as well. So over here we have NS mutable array, okay, and we have an simple array, right, the Swift array, and we have two functions, foo and bar. The foo function is taken in array, and bar is taking NS mutable array as parameter. And in the function, what we are doing is we are just changing the second index value to pen. So the second index value is notebook over here, but what we are doing, we are changing it to pen. So we'll see what happens when we try to change the value for NS mutable array, which is uh, a reference type, whereas what happens when we try to change the value of array, which is a value type. So here we have called these functions with these arrays, and we are trying to print it. So when we print ln arr is this array, which is a NS mutable array, which is reference type. So what happens in reference type? The value changes. Notebook is not notebook anymore, it is pen, because we are changing the value at reference type. Reference type means it is referring to the memory location itself. So it will change the value at so when we say reference type, all these, this and this is sharing same memory location, and that's why the value will be changed. Okay, but when we say value type, it has different copy of the values, right? Bar will have different copy, and this this array will have different copy, which we are passing in the foo function, right? So in the array, which is a struct, which is value type, the value will not change. Notebook will stay notebook. Okay, it won't change. So if you don't know the difference between value type and reference type, it will be difficult for you. It is very important questions. You'll if you're not being asked NS array versus array, you will definitely be asked difference between struct and class. So this is very important. I would say that you have to know this question before going to any interview. Even if it is not iOS interview, you will be asked in any programming, in any programming interview, you can be asked between difference between value type and reference type, or difference between struct and class. So it is similar to NSArray and array as well. Next is Dictionary versus dictionary. So same as NSArray and array, dictionary is a native Swift struct. So when we say struct, dictionary becomes value type, whereas NSDictionary is a Cocoa class. So when we say class, NSDictionary becomes reference type. So the same difference we show between NSArray and array can be used similarly in NSDictionary and dictionary as well. Okay, so it's exactly parallel to array and NSArray. So dictionary is value type and NSDictionary is reference type. Okay, NSNumber versus int. So we will not just cover NSNumber and int, we will cover NSInteger as well. So NSInteger is simply an integer, and NSNumber is an object, whereas int is a primitive data type. Okay, NSInteger is nothing more than a synonym for big integer. So there's no difference between NSInteger and integer. It's just that with NSInteger you'll be using for long integer, you will be using NSInteger, and int you can. So it depends on the whether you're using 64-bit or 32-bit. It depends on that. So your size of the int or NSInteger depends on the architecture, whether you are using 32-bit or 64-bit, based on that. So when do you use that? If you need to store a number somewhere, then you should use NSNumber, because NSNumber is an object, right? If you are doing some calculation or looping, etc., then it is better to go for NSInteger, NSUinteger, or int. Okay, so if you want to store some integer values, then use NSNumber, and if you want to do some calculations, then use NSInteger or int. So there's basically no difference between NSInteger and int. It's just that NSInteger is like a synonym for long integer. Okay. Example of strong and weak. Okay, I remember that I had covered the difference between all the attributes in my very first iOS interview questions part 1. So if you haven't seen that, I would again recommend you to go back and see that video, because I won't be covering what is the difference between strong and weak, because I have already covered it. Please do watch it. I did not cover in that video was what I did not cover was example of strong and weak. So uh, you would be in some way interview questions, they do ask these questions like when do you use strong and when do you use weak. So we use weak whenever we are using delegates, outlets, subviews and controls, whereas we use strong with all of the remaining things. So if you're not using delegates or outlets or subview or controls, then you'll be using strong. Okay, and it does depend on many things, that if you're creating an object, if you're creating a variable and you want to make sure that it stays in the memory as long as you're using it, and it stays in the memory for a long time, then you use strong. Whereas if you want to deallocate it as soon as it as soon as it's done being used, then you should use weak. Or wherever you see there is a retain cycle going on, then please do use weak. So that's why delegates you should always create as weak, because it depends on if you don't create delegates weak, then it can create retain cycle. And same goes for outlets, subviews and controls as well. So please do use weak whenever you think that the particular variable or properties, you don't need it for much longer and you want it to be deallocated as soon as you are done using that, then please do use weak. Always use weak whenever you see there is a retain cycle going on. So if you do not know what is retain cycle, again I would recommend you to go to part 1 and watch that video. I would be leaving link for that video in this video's description. Computed and stored properties. Okay, so we have always talked about property attributes, but I never talked about the types of properties. So I was asked this question only once till now, so it's not very important, but it is good to know, and you can be asked this question because I was asked one at least. So let's see. So stored properties are nothing but whenever you are storing any value in some variable, or in some instances you are creating an object in class instance, then it is a stored properties. So store constant, and what does stored property do? It store constant and variable values in an as instance provided by class and structures. So you can use stored properties in classes and structure. It's very simple. Whenever you create a variable or you create a property, then it is stored properties. Mostly it is stored properties. Whereas computed properties, when if you want to perform any calculation, then you will be using computed properties. Calculate a value rather than storing the value. So instead of just storing the value in a variable, or in a variable, you will be calculating the value instead of storing it. So that is why let declaration cannot be is not possible for computed properties, because when you create let, you have to define the value of that particular, because it's a constant, right? It cannot be changed. So it's as simple as it is. So uh, computed properties, as the name suggests, computed it rather than storing the value, it calculates the value. And computed properties are provided by classes, enumeration, structure and extension. So stored properties can be used in classes and structures, and computed properties can be used in classes, enumeration, structures and extensions. So sometimes in interview they can ask you that whether you can create property in extension. So the answer would be, we cannot create stored properties in extension or enumeration, but we can create computed properties in extension and enumeration. Whereas we can create both stored properties and computed properties in classes and structures. Cool. So I just wanted to give you a small example as well. So stored properties, it's simple. var name string, this we are storing this value in this name variable, and we are storing this 20 value in this constant variable y. Computed property, you will be calculating it. So there are different ways of doing it. You can create getter and setter. So let's say we have this value variable, it's a stored properties property, and then we have this var result. So result will be calculated using this val. So you can just return 100 for get, or you can set this number what you will be passing. So you can use any name for the passed parameter. Default is num. Default is num value, I believe. I have written it wrong. So you can just assign this value to num. So you can do any type of calculation. I have just written simple thing. So if you want to do some hardcore, you want to check something before giving the result, you can do all those calculation over here. So this is one way of doing it. If you don't want setter, you just want to return some value based on some calculation, you can do the calculation and just return 10. You don't have to define set, just say get. Or you can just remove get as well, because it just if you just have get, it doesn't make sense to have this curly braces as well. So you can just say var x colon int and then return 10, or do your calculation and after do return 10. So this is also valid syntax for computed properties. Okay, property observer for computed property. So many times in interview they will ask you when would will set or did set be called in our Swift class. So each and every time when property value are set, property observers are being called. Okay, so whenever, and it is only for computed properties, guys. Okay, so whenever you set a property for a computed whenever you set a value for a computed property, these two property observers will be called. The first one is will set, which will be called before storing the value, whereas did set will be called after storing the new value. Okay, so when a property is set in a initializer, then will set and did set will not be called. Okay, so if you are setting it in an initializer like init function, then these two functions will not be called. But if you are setting it like this, like these, then did set and will set will be called. Okay, so here's a small example. So let's say we have class property observer example class, and we have a counter variable. It's a computed property, and so for this we can use did set and will set. So in will set and did set, the default variable which will be passed in will set, it is new total. So total counter is new total, and if counter is greater than old value, so new total and old value, it is default, you can just use it. Okay, so old value and new value is something which is default. You can use old value or you can use new value as well. New total is something which you have passed. So total is written over here. In did set, we can just do some calculation based on our calculator, sorry, counter. If counter is greater than old value, then we will be saying newly added counter old value. So we can print it like this. Okay, so when we initialize this class and we call new counter dot counter 10 and new counter dot counter 60, so we are just changing the counter value. So whenever we are setting these value, you can see the response. So total counter is 10, and then newly added counter is 10. Okay, total counter is 60, next time 60, newly added counter will be 50 because old value was 10, so it has deducted 60 minus 10, so the new value is, so even if we don't use counter, we can use new value over here. So if new value is greater than old value, we can write like this as well. So new value and old values are defined value, predefined, like it is already there, you don't have to define it. Okay, so old value represents the last value, and new value represents the current set value. So this is how well set and did set work. Okay, some questions which were like just small questions, but it's very important. Like, can we use computed and stored properties in extension? I think I have mentioned it already in one of this slide in this video as well. Like over here, so computed properties can be used in enumeration and extension. So this is what we are saying. So we can use computed properties with extension but not stored properties. So this was asked to me in like 4 5 interviews. It is very important question. So they ask this question to confuse you, because in many time when you write when you try to write any property, when you try to create a variable in extension, you will get compiler error, because stored properties, you cannot create stored properties in extension. So you think that you cannot create properties at all, but because we don't use computed properties so much, we don't check them. But you can use computed properties in an extension. I would suggest you to open your Xcode and test it as well. Create an extension of your view controller and try to create computed properties. You will see that you will be able to create computed properties, but when you try to create stored property, you will get compiler error itself. So please do check that. Can we write extension for struct, enum and protocol? So this question can be asked as well. So yes, we can write extension for all of them. We can write extension for struct, we can write extension for enum, and of course we can write extension for protocol as well. Protocol extension is something very good, which is one of the concept for protocol oriented programming. So you should definitely look into protocol extension, because it is a very good question. You can be asked. I am very sure that I have covered protocol extension in one of my videos. So please do check out those videos, or you can just Google protocol extension and you'll get so many links to read about it. Okay, is optional an enum? Okay, if you do not know what is optional, then again I would suggest Google it or look into my previous videos. You will definitely find some good information. So optional is something every iOS developer, every Swift developer should know. Okay, so is optional an enum? Yes, it is an enum. Okay, I did not know this. I was asked this question in one of the interview, and then the interviewer told me that yes, optional is enum. Do you know optional is enum or not? When he asked me like this, I was like, okay, yeah, sure, optional might be enum, if you say so, but I wasn't very sure. So you should be very sure that yes, optional is an enum with two cases. One is none and one is with associated value. So it just says sum, then wrapped associated value. So this is what this is why you can have nil. So this dot none represent the nil value, which can be assigned to an optional variable. So option can be nil and it can have some value. This is the definition of option, right? So this is because of this, option can have nil or it can have some value. So the next question I want to talk about is sync versus async. So this was asked to me like in 2 3 interviews. It's very important question. I'm very sure that you understand what is sync versus async, but we can create deadlock. We can create deadlock situation using sync and async, and it can get confusing sometimes. So let me just let's just talk about it. So when you invoke something synchronously, it means that the thread that initiated that operation will wait for the task to finish before continuing. Asynchronous means that it will not wait. So when you say synchronous, your thread will wait for a task to complete. Okay, so very good example would be whenever you create let's say you have 3 API calls to make and you made it synchronously. So what happens, the first API call will be made, and once that is done, then second API call will be made, and when that is done, then third API call will be made. So all three API calls will be done at synchronously, like one after another. Okay, whereas asynchronously means that all three API calls will start at one time itself, and it does not, none of the API call will depend on each other. Okay, so asynchronous is much faster, uh, but synchronous, that is why, because synchronous means that it does all the operation one by one, it is slow, and asynchronous is faster. That is why we always prefer asynchronous over synchronous when it comes to performance. So our goal is to free the main thread so that it can continue to response user interface rather than freezing it. So whenever we are doing any threading operation, any background operation, we just want to make sure that our UI is running as smooth as possible. It is not freezing, right? So for that we have to perform that operation in the background thread. Okay, even in the background thread you can do it in synchronous or you can do it synchronously or asynchronously. But if you do it synchronously, it will do those operations one by one, and then it becomes slow. If you do it asynchronously, then it will be faster. So when we want to make sure that our operation is fast, then it doesn't, like, any background operation is not freezing our UI, then there are two parts to this. What we do, we grab a background queue. For example, in GCT we'll be grabbing a background queue, we'll create a background queue, and then we will dispatch your task to that queue either synchronously or asynchronously. It depends on you based on your requirement, but it is always recommended you to do background operation asynchronously so that it is much faster. Okay, how do we create deadlock situation? Okay, so one of the example for deadlock situation in async is queue.s. So we created a queue. Okay, that's what I just explained. We'll create a queue, and then we will perform that operation asynchronously or synchronously. So what if we create one queue and we asked it to perform the operation asynchronously first, and then in that queue again we again asked it to perform the operation synchronously. So what happens in that situation? The outer block starts waiting for the inner block to complete. So this block will start waiting for this block to complete, and inner block won't even start the process, and it will before outer block is finished. So the inner block is waiting for outer block, and outer block is waiting for inner block, and that is why this deadlock situation comes. Okay, we will never reach to this last, like, we'll never come out of this loop itself, and there will be a deadlock. So whenever you are calling synchronous inside asynchronous, it will create a deadlock situation. Whereas if you do similarly, if you do synchronous inside synchronous itself, then also it will create deadlock situation. It will again be the same situation, that this block is waiting for this block is waiting for this block, and will never reach to our next lines, and it will forever be here. So it will create the deadlock situation. So these two, so whenever you are calling synchronous operation inside of a queue which is either synchronous or asynchronous, then it will create a deadlock situation. Whereas if you call asynchronous inside sync or async, then it will not create the deadlock situation. So outer block is waiting for inner block to complete, inner block won't. Okay, I did not update these, I just copy pasted from here to there. But in this situation, it will not create the deadlock situation. So what I did, I had created the project and I tried all these operations. So what I would suggest you to do is write a print statement after this. Write a print statement in this block, and write it after these two blocks as well over here. Okay, so write one printf statement in this block, write another print statement in this block, and then write one print statement after this, and then do all these four deadlock situations, right? These two deadlock situation and these two where deadlock doesn't happen. So these are the two deadlock situations which occurs using sync and async. So this was asked to me in two of the interviews. So, and I think it is important, so you should know. Okay, semaphore. Semaphore was asked to me in one interview only. So what happens in semaphore is only one thread can access one resource. So it is for thread safety we use semaphore. So for example, let me just give one very good example which I read online. So let's say there are two kids and and there's a father, okay, and he just took out an iPad. So the two kids are fighting that I will use the iPad, or the second kid is saying I will use the iPad. So there are two kids, kid number one and kid number two, and they both want to use iPad. But if this father he gives the iPad to both the kids, they will fight over it and they'll break the iPad itself. So what he said that first kid number one who came first will use the iPad, and he allocated some time, like just let me know, he tell the kid number one that let me know that when you are done with that iPad. So the kid number one is using the iPad first, and once he's done he tells his father that okay, I'm done with it. Now if his father will give this iPad to kid number two. So this is exactly what semaphore is. So our resources is iPad and threads are kids in our father and kids example. So only one thread can access our one resource. Only one kid can access the iPad at one time. So how it works is the first person who comes for the resource will get access to the resource, and once he's done he will give a signal to our it will give a signal that I'm done. Then second will come and take the resource. So this is how we initialize semaphore in our Swift. Let's semaphore dispatch semaphore value 1. So value 1 indicates that only one thread can access this resource at this time. Okay, and then we have two functions, wait and signal. Wait means that this one thread is coming and waiting for this resource. It is asking semaphore for its permission to access this particular resource. Okay, so wait is like, hey, I want to access this resource, saying like, hey, I want this resource, or hey dad, I want this iPad to use first. Okay, so wait is like that. Signal is, okay, I'm done using it, now somebody else can use it. So signal is signaling the semaphore. Semaphore is nothing but father in our situation, which is handling this situation, right? So semaphore is handling, so it signals the semaphore that okay, I'm done using it, now you can give it to somebody else. Okay, so very good example, real time. We have given real time example. This is a programming example. Let's say you want to download 15 songs from a URL. Okay, so what you do is you create a queue. So as I explained you earlier, whenever you want to create some long running operation in background thread, you should create a queue first. So you can name the queue and then give any attribute to that queue, and then create semaphore. Let's say this semaphore says that three values, like three songs, can be downloaded at one time. Okay, so with this semaphore we will handle this downloading the 15 songs. So what happens is we'll create a for loop, and then in asynchronous block we will be downloading 15 songs. In asynchronous block, let song number I plus 1 semaphore wait. So first semaphore wait, and then print downloading song number, and sleep for 2 seconds, so that because it takes 2 seconds to download each song. Okay, and once all the download is done, we'll print the song number which was there. So this will print 1 and this will print 3. Okay, and then we'll give signal that okay, now next person can use. Next group of songs can be downloaded. So first 3 songs will be downloaded first, and the next 3 songs will be downloaded next, and then another next 3 songs, set of next 3 songs will be downloaded in next group. Okay, so this is how Semaphore works. I hope you understand. You understood. Okay, cool. So yes, that was it for today's video. I hope you liked this video. If you liked it, please do like it, comment and subscribe to my channel.